This program might contain strong language. If you think you may be offended, switch off now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Watch Mojo and the Inside Podcast. I'm your host, Rob, and if you're new to this show, this is where every week we tackle a new issue, do a deep dive into trending topics, and this week we're looking at The Age of Disclosure, a new film that has come out by filmmaker Dan Farah. This comes off of last week's episode where we went inside conspiracy theories. I'm joined today by WatchMojo CEO and co-founder Ashkan Karbis-Frushan. How's it going, Ash?
Very, very good.
As well as am I. We're also joined by special guest Darcy Weir, a UFO researcher and filmmaker whose work can be seen on the Unveiled YouTube channel. How's it going, Darcy?
Great. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So I was very excited for this episode because this is right in my wheelhouse. I've been hosting the Unveiled podcast on WatchMojo for almost a year now. So I've done pretty extensive research into the UAP field. And this is a film that I thought was important to talk about because it has the whole UAP crowd kind of buzzing right now. And so for somebody such as yourself, Ash, who I know you're somewhat aware of the topic, but maybe not super well versed in it, give me your first impressions after having watched this film.
Well, to be fair, you're right that until recently, this was a world that I had kind of, not forgotten, but, when I talk about content, I always say you're either a producer or a consumer. So when I was like a young kid and, I had my encyclopedias and I would read magazines and watch TV shows, whether it was like Unsolved Mysteries or whatever, I was actually really, really, really into the whole UFO, universe. But of course, this was before the internet. If you would watch like Unsolved Mysteries and they would package a clip or they would produce a segment, that's how you consumed it. But also when it comes to the world of YouTube and search, I've always said it's discovery and recovery. So for me, what was fascinating, not just when you and previously some other of our teammates were like, we should start covering the space, internally, I was like, oh, good, go for it. Because this was an area that I really liked. And when we started WatchMojo and when we do conspiracy or we would take like Roswell or we would just break down the world, I wouldn't actually push it too much because I didn't want the rest of the team to think I was some kind of, in quotation mark, nut job or conspiracy theorist, and the documentary we talk about when they talk about taboo and stigma, like I was really like, oh, I totally know what they're talking about. And this documentary was fascinating. So I was like, I'm game for any topic that you guys want to cover. But then I was really kind of going more and more into this world of, the UAP space. And, it was fascinating because you saw a lot of people that are like in the mainstream that I had seen through the lens of politics, business, the economy. So it kind of brought back a lot of, it was like my life was flashing before my eyes. And, I was up last night before the Canadiens match, which they're playing out west. So it was a 9:30 start. So I watched it. And then I started to watch the podcast that you sent me a sneak peek of you two gentlemen. But then it was really late because the game ended pretty late. And then I was watching it again today. So now I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to go down this rabbit hole. And it's like I'm the 12-year-old again. So no, I thought it was fascinating. And obviously, I don't know as much as you do, either of you. But I know enough. And, I'm really excited. I'm almost more excited for today's show than most of the other topics that we've done. And we'll explain why, because of the questions and the outline that we've prepped. So let's go.
Yeah, that's great to hear because this is one of the few episodes that I actually pushed hard to do. So I'm happy that you're enthusiastic about it.
You don't have to kidnap my kids, by the way. Just
we're all gonna have to be very careful after this that the government doesn't come after us. So you've previously kind of made fun of the fact that they're calling them UAPs now instead of UFOs. But it does have to do with the stigma that you're talking about, the one that you alluded to, that, you didn't want to show too big of an interest in it because you didn't want people to look at you weird or whatever. And that's kind of what we've seen happening over the past 7-8 years now is a shift in the public perception of this and a change in the language that's being used. But as somebody who's really well versed in the media world, when you see a documentary like this made by someone like Dan Farah, who's a Hollywood level producer, do you think that that lends more credibility to the messages in the movie?
So I think it depends with the baggage that you have going into it. You know, when we talk, I mean, I'm going to touch on there's a lot of points where I'm going to be like, we talked about capitalism. We talked about, Marxism. So when we talk about AI, I think if you are like an open-minded person, when you look at like the work generated by AI, and I've always said it's never going to be only AI, it's humans and AI. I think you're going to have an open mind and you're going to see it as like, this is progress. This could lead to good things. But if you're like, let's say a writer or like a food recipe, blogger, and you see AI affects you in a certain way, then you walk into it with like a negative bias and a prejudice. So what I think this will do is overall, there's going to be a Venn diagram. To those like me that kind of most parts of it, like 90% of it kind of believe, we'll just leave it at that for now. I think it reinforces and it gives me a bit of comfort to share, tweet about it, write about it, and weave it to topics of religion and God, and weave it to economic determinism, and discuss the industrial military complex. If, however, you have a strong bias against it, you're going to be like, oh, everybody's just jumping on this because it's being searched and there's money to be made. It's a grift, But there is this in the middle, and I was blown away seeing some politicians that I'm human, as much as I like to listen to any human based on the topic and not the baggage that it comes with. I was blown away by that there was this Venn diagram where in the middle, it's going to probably lend it a lot more credibility, but that obviously depends on the marketing, the distribution, and I know we're going to talk about it being behind a paywall. So that's the way I look at it, but net positive if you're for disclosure, so to speak.
Darcy, as a filmmaker yourself who's made many films over the past decade or so, do you see this as a win for the movement with such a polished product that was really a lot of time and effort was put into it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm overall a huge fan of cinema, film, documentary. I watched a documentary series just last night, trying to relax, on Netflix about this like guy that swindled $650 million or something from Hollywood, pretending to be like this investment tycoon or something. But, I think this movie will have an impact. And in terms of just getting the word out on the idea that we're not alone, and maybe the government, the military, and intelligence communities have been involved in what's called a cover-up. This will definitely be a strong, green light in terms of spreading that word. And I think it's important for anybody, like Ash was saying, that's interested in disclosure. Like basically the idea of disclosure is the government comes forward and fully acknowledges and says, look, we're not alone. Aliens are real. And that's usually the president. That's thematically, it's supposed to be the president approaching a podium and addressing the nation and the world that this is a real phenomenon. Is that going to happen? It's anybody's best guess. I mean, if you scroll through Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, pick your poison in terms of social media, everybody is saying Trump's going to be the disclosure president. I think he needs it to take people's minds off the Epstein files, but that's a whole other issue. At the same time, it would be a net positive if that actually happens. And I think this film is a catalyst for that, because at the end of the day, what politicians historically do is they listen to the people, they see what is trending, and they make their moves based off of that. we have a trending movement in disclosure already on Capitol Hill, right? We have Eric Burleson, Congress members like Chuck Schumer, all of these Democratic and Republican lawmakers that literally are bipartisan about this one issue because it's existential. It's like groundbreaking if we acknowledge that we're not alone in the universe, right? Scientifically and consciously. So it'll be pretty interesting to see if this movie shifts the wave and really makes it something that's going to have to be addressed.
I want to talk to you guys.
I just laughed a bit when it's funny because I love hearing people's perspective when you're like, politicians listen to the people, because there's a lot of people that would say not really, but I think you're right. Net, that's what they follow because they want the vote. So you're right. But could you imagine Trump coming up to the podium, a la Abu Bakr Baghdadi died like a dog, and he just goes like that, blue-eyed? That would be, I don't know if that would lend it credibility or not. But anyway, sorry. That's why I was laughing. I was not at all disagreeing with what you were saying, but the idea of Trump at the podium was chef's kiss.
Yeah, that was a moment that would go down in history forever and ever. So I would hope that it's not presented in a goofy way like that.
It would guaranteed happen. I think he's when asked about this issue in the past, he's very meticulously sort of supported the pilots and the intelligence and military people because he knows that that's important to his base. But he's kind of walked back support in terms of whether he actually believes in aliens. So I don't think he's going to do disclosure. It's my opinion, and he could prove me wrong, and his administration could come in full force after they realize this might be the wave that they ride to gain more popularity. But let's see. He might piss off a lot of right-wing Christians, in my opinion, because if you look, even in the documentary, it's addressed that the powers that be that were above Lou Elizondo and Jay Stratton were calling these things demons and the devil's work if they investigate the hard science behind it, which is crazy. That seems to be the major stigma that's being fought in Capitol Hill, because there's obviously proof of this stuff on paper and video and pictures, but they don't want to address it because of religious stigma.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, for sure. There was one comment that we had up on the screen just a moment ago saying, I don't trust government, so it's hard to trust what these people say in the film. And I understand that sentiment, and it brings me to something else that I wanted to talk to you guys about, which is kind of the central figure of the movie, a gentleman named Lou Elizondo, who I actually had the pleasure of interviewing for the Unveiled podcast. And he is not without his controversy, a lot of differing sentiments about him online. But I wanted to get your takes because he is more or less the protagonist of the film. And does he come off to you, Ash, as a credible person from what you've seen?
I think he comes across as a pretty credible person. I think with people like that, so this is a general comment, not him, there is, in the era of social media where everybody with a phone and access to the web can become not just a storyteller, but also just eventually a media company, or like a so-called expert. There is this kind of like grift, and there is this essential, like, you got to go to the extreme, like I'm somebody that, because I always see both perspectives and I present it, I end up alienating both sides, especially with more heated topics like Iran politics, which we touched on before, or capitalism and socialism, like things that are very fiery. You got to take a side, which is why like MSNBC did well and Fox does well and Newsmax, but CNN struggles, so to speak, right? So as a general thing, a lot of people are going to see him as just somebody who had a career in field X and as we all get older, we have to reinvent ourselves. I'm not the 20-year-old young, let's say, student with the dreams and ambition, nor am I the 27-year-old entrepreneur. At 47, I've learned that I have to reinvent myself, So he's going to get, again, with people's bias coming into the topic, he's going to get people loving him, supporting him, viewing him, maybe not so much as a protagonist, but like a tragic hero. But what he is doing, and not just him, a lot of other people, well, these are like the heroes and the patriots, not to use hyperbole, that like are effectively taking a risk to bring a topic to the surface that does have far-reaching repercussions. But now him specifically, I do think that he was definitely very credible. But what was interesting, and I produced a documentary, probably nowhere as experienced as you, Darcy, but I'm talking about stitching together quotes, which is an arduous, that's a labor of love. You got to be passionate about this. I do think, though, that in the portfolio and the montages and the way all the quotes were sliced, and it wasn't just a bunch of people that maybe were like, didn't get a promotion, so they became bitter, so they wanted, they had a reason to maybe have an agenda. And you could argue everybody has an agenda. So I do think the way it's packaged, it's really hard for anybody to watch throughout, along with all the evidence, along with all the video and testimony, and throughout eras, throughout geographies, and how it touches on military investment and lobbies. And as Darcy said, religious groups, and some religious groups, because I actually, after that, went to research. I knew, like, I'm atheist agnostic, let's say, but I understand how Muslims would view it a bit more, being born Muslim. I looked at Judaism and how it would view it, and Christians, and even within Christianity, it's not, monolithic. So I think it's hard for anybody to come away and say, this guy's a hack, right? And it's really the totality where it does give it credibility. And to Darcy's previous point, look, I'm a transparent guy. I mean, Darcy doesn't know me from a lineup, but Rob, you've worked with me long enough to know that I'm like extremely transparent. I don't think necessarily, I would love to see Donald Trump or any president address any topic. And the documentary does a great job of explaining the need to know dynamic, which I'm aware of, and I understand why. Sometimes my lawyer could be like, yeah, you don't need to make this statement because then you don't have anything to deny. Like I understand how that racket works. But I actually don't think that if this is marketed properly and discussed, we're WatchMojo. I know what lanes we're in and what people expect of us and not. But the way that this is going to kind of do the media promo tour, so to speak, this could serve as a catalyst that you almost don't need disclosure coming from POTUS first. I'm not saying eventually you don't need it, but if enough credible people, because let's face it, Donald Trump, if he comes out and makes a statement, everybody on the left's like, well, this guy's a hack. You know what I mean? And also, there was this fascinating element about the China-Russia-US dynamic, which, again, as a guy that follows all this, I myself was like, I was getting goosebumps. I loved it. So there you go. So, I just think that you don't necessarily need that official disclosure. I think this will probably push the narrative and the discussion to a place where it will probably become more mainstream and more accepted, meaning less resistance, less people just thinking this guy's a Yahoo type of thing. So it was fascinating for me because I have like the comfort now to discuss this, whereas before I was like, I say enough things that people are like, Ash is very credible and serious, very professional, but sometimes he says some crazy things. I get the knocks. So this now is like kind of it does give a lot of people permission, so to speak.
Yeah, there's a great question that we just had up. Why doesn't anyone discuss what Russia and China's response would be after the American president, whoever that is, announces the U.S. has crashed UAP and probably reverse engineered it? What do you think, Ash? If there was to be a presidential disclosure tomorrow, how do you think Russia and China and possibly other countries would respond to that?
Well, the reality is, for all of the criticism of America, and I criticize American foreign policy, but I love America and I love Americans. And I do think America is a very close model to like this really good, perfect to some utopia. The freedoms in societies and the opportunities, again, there's a lot of challenges in America and the injustices. I know that. But But I think America is a more transparent place. Like I think you heard all the politicians who were like, well, you know what, there's a African-American gentleman. Again, I should have I took a lot of notes, but I didn't take every name. He was like, us keeping the lid on this is not the American way. And I was nodding along, going relative to like where I was born in Iran. And because the doc touches on Russia and China. So I think if America came out and issued a statement, or imagine if Trump like summarized the whole doc, just saying there has been videos, there have been military people. Whether I believe it or not, I'll believe it when I see it. Like he's not he's intelligent, but he's not serious like that. He cracks jokes, he's got his style. I don't think Russia and China would come out and disclose it because, for one, media in China is very different. It's China's a fascinating paradox in of itself. It's not North Korea at all. But what I'm saying is, it's not like their version of CNN or Fox or New York Times will have the permission or authority and freedom to just write about it, whatever. So I think the leadership of China may not necessarily have any like incentive or need to address it. And I'll get to the why. And Russia is a little bit the same way, but Russia's a bit different because it is involved right now in a kinetic conflict with Ukraine. And it does need to project a different kind of like ambiguity, because China tomorrow, I mean, there's the Taiwan thing, I get that, but China tomorrow, the odds of them going nuclear, like not they are nuclear, but like let's say like going nuclear and like striking somebody is
launching nukes.
They're going to be a bit more restrained. Whereas like Putin is actually a very intelligent person, obviously, but Russia's involved in something, and that could spill over with NATO. Ergo, then America gets it. So I think Russia will want ambiguity, and the reason why I think that's really critical, and not critical, the reason why I think that is a pretty realistic scenario is what the documentary explained with, there have been probably these physical objects, the UAPs, that have also probably been dropped in China and Russia. And one of the gentlemen was like, maybe the aliens wanted to leave this there. And, it was fascinating. But so I do think, though, that if you follow that logic, that if some of these objects ended up, now the why, up for speculation, but I think if some of these objects did land in America and all these credible overall, like as a collective, one person could lie, but it's hard. All of these things are all made up. Then why would there not also be similar incidences in Russia and China, right? So I do believe that, this is not contained to America. I have a ton of questions, just to be clear. I'm also not like 100%. I wasn't nodding with everything. As theories, I was like, okay, plausible, unlikely, probable, improbable, But I do think that China and Russia would probably prefer to let the world think that they have reversed engineer as much as America has, maybe even more, but without really saying anything because their media is different at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think most people agree that this is a global phenomenon and not central to the United States. There's probably many more countries, even besides Russia and China, that have worked on reverse engineering or recovered craft. Or who knows? It's not. We focus this conversation often within the parameters of the United States just due to our location, but I'm sure it's very far-reaching, and it brings up the point of kind of the main narrative of the film, which was one of mitigating potential threat. And Darcy, I'll start with you on this because we kind of spoke about it in the podcast that is going to be released Friday, the Unveiled podcast that will be released Friday. What do you think about the narrative that was promoted in this film regarding potential threats? As much from the UAP that are like legitimately of unknown origin, as well as ones that could potentially be originating from different countries, the sort of arms race between the global powers to harness this technology. What's your take on that?
Sure. So just before I answer that, I will cascade into answering that, but I just want to address B.A. Touche's question or statement before. I don't trust government. So it's hard to trust what people say in this film. I think you might be confusing things there, because the people that are addressing this issue in the film are saying they don't trust the government. They don't trust the military and intelligence community that has kept access to this information from the public. So these people in the documentary are saying, we have been exposed to the reality of UAP, UFOs, non-human intelligence possibly being here. We want that to be public. And that's the whole purpose of the documentary. They want to break out the secrecy and change the way things are going with the government. Because right now, yes, there is a lot of distrust with the government. I'd say, post-World War II, the government's favor is at an all-time low, right? Back in the day, after World War II, the government might say, jump, and most of the populace would say how high. But nowadays, internationally, governments are not trusted. And we live in the age of information. And part of that information is disinformation. The government can be part of that disinformation, or they can be part of the proper science and exploration information age that we're trying to get to, right? AI has the ability to exacerbate the disinformation side, because disinformers will use that tool to accelerate their disinformation campaigns, marketing online. And then the informers that are trying to be, the tip of the spear of bringing truth, they can also use AI and fight that sort of online discourse. So I just wanted to address that. I understand. I don't trust the government either. I think that's why, part of my documentary filmmaking has been addressing secrecy and that there is something going on with this phenomenon. Do I know exactly what it is? No. Most of the time, a cult leader is going to say exactly what they think it is and to follow them. And I would be wary of people that are saying they know exactly what this is. And, give your credit card information now. Mm-hmm. So then to your other question about Russia, China, is this a thing that they should be involved with? They have been. If you've kind of kept your ears open in the last few months, George Knapp, he was in the Capitol of the United States at a congressional hearing, among other whistleblowers, and he testified to the fact that when the Iron Curtain came down in the 90s, Soviet Union was crumbling. There was a bit of a expansion out to the West in terms of welcomeness. And George Knapp, as a journalist, typical run in the beat news journalist, was like, this is amazing. I'm going to travel to Russia now, and I want to interview people about UFOs, because he was one of these guys that's been covering the UFO beat for a long time. Seriously, trying to find facts and real sources and stuff. When he went to Russia, he interviewed generals, intelligence people, KGB, all of these different sources that are engaging with the secrecy around UAP and UFOs. And they told a lot of the history on that to him. And they gave him source files, like real government investigation files, which he came back to the United States with. So that was a big thing. And at the congressional hearing, he was saying, like, the Russians had their own crash craft retrieval program. They were trying to shoot them down too. They were trying to reverse engineer them, just like allegedly the Americans have been doing with, the S4 Tonopah test range, Area 51 stories. And, seem to be on the same track. I don't think China would try to skip that frontier of investigation and research as well, because we're talking about technology here. And right now we are amidst a global artificial intelligence race. Why wouldn't there also be a reverse engineering of exotic energies race behind the scenes? Because as you may note, energy is going to be the most expensive thing in the future to run all of these AI systems, server farms that expand for miles to have the most powerful AI. And militaries and governments will want that to be in their arsenal. So why wouldn't you go off of traditional fossil fuels and the energies that have been allowed to be operated in the public? Because in this documentary, they address the sort of like energy embargo idea, which is the idea that if there were an exotic energy, something that you could kind of allude to being 0 point or free energy device, well, the powers that be would not want that public. The FBI would intercept it, the CIA, whoever in the police force of a country would intercept that, because there's an economy backbone being run in a lot of different countries on fossil fuels. Even if it's wind and solar, there has to be a setup to that income stream and to manpower and economic growth. You don't want to disturb that by introducing something that's a total disruptor, a total game changer. And that could be something that they find on a crashed alien craft. Let's face it, it could be. So I think Russia would be taking part in those exploits for sure. I think China would be remiss not to. And I think the United States has been. I can't prove it for sure, but I have seen CIA papers where this you can prove, and I can share that with people if they ever want it. I have this PDF copy of the CIA saying that they would intercept in the 70s companies that made innovation in solar panel tech that was more than 20% efficient. And the whole reason is that they didn't want to disrupt the fossil fuel industry.
Right. Yeah. And we've heard many stories, or at least I've heard, of people inventing different devices, we call it 0 point energy, free energy, or whatever. And then those things they disappear, or those people disappear, bad things happen to them. Like there's been like even going back to Nikola Tesla and what happened to him, basically.
Union Oil bought all of his patents when he died. Those are gone.
Yeah, exactly. But it ties into, so we heard from physicists Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis in the documentary. And one of the most interesting parts about it to me was when they were talking about their theories as to how these craft operate and how they defy physics. And when they're monitored by Navy and Air Force personnel, they can't explain the incredible acceleration. They seem to teleport from one location to another. They enter water and then reemerge without any disruption whatsoever. And there's that element to it. And then there's also when Eric Davis talking about the bodies that were recovered and saying that he's aware of at least 2 distinct non-human species that were recovered by the American government and are in their possession. So I'll go back to you, Ash, on this. When you hear now about UAPs, do you make the automatic connection with aliens, or do you think that there's a distinction between alien and UAP?
Okay, so that's a great question. I think just statistically, regardless of your religion and all that, whether you're atheist, religious, or I think just the size of the universe, the number of galaxies and all that, it is beyond arrogant and nearsighted to think that humans like you and I and Darcy, we're the only ones in all of this. I mean, that's just the arrogance, the sheer, that to me has never made sense. Now, what I used to say, even when I was an 8-year-old reading about this, or a 20-year-old, first starting to write about this, is Yeah, they don't necessarily need to look like us, nor like aliens, whatever you want to define them as. Like they will definitely not necessarily look like us, and they're not going to be like the way Hollywood projects them. And it could be that they're, the way octopus are really smart, or dolphins, like that is an ecosystem, right? So to me, it was always, and I also felt like perhaps the human eyes cannot even see them, just because, the space and matter is different. Could it be, not saying ghosts, but could people that see ghosts basically be seeing, as a hypothesis? So I've always believed 100%, like, no, obviously, to me, 95, 99%, I've been pretty, firm that in this huge universe where the Earth is a tiny speck in the solar planet, let alone everywhere else, there is going to be life form elsewhere. And it's very condescending, ethnocentric to the top to think that doesn't happen. Now, where I always, I know a lot about many things, but I'm not a physicist. So I did think that the documentary did a great job in a simple way to explain why these scientists believe in this, where historically they may be like, you're on drugs. And so, yeah, the things you talked about and that they touch about, I thought all of these were great perspectives. And again, they could be saying gibberish because I'm not a physicist, but I thought that part for me was really insightful. And again, makes everything a bit less taboo and stigmatic, so to speak. Now, in terms of, you talk about Tesla, Nicola, but let's build a bridge to Tesla, the company, and then Elon Musk.
Yes.
So when Elon Musk, for example, talks about, let's go to Mars, there's a part of me that goes, why? I know the whys, but it could, one of them is like, well, if life on Earth becomes extinct, we need a place to go. And, the Noah's Ark kind of parallel. In that scenario, like when you go to like an old city, I was in London last week. There's some buildings that have been there for like 1,000 years, 500 years, but the insides keep getting modernized. So it is possible that you've had planets or space around the galaxies and the universe where whatever life form existed might have become extinct, and some of them somehow pulled what Elon Musk is doing with Mars. We're seeing it before our eyes. He's talking about it. I believe it'll happen, maybe not in my lifetime. It's not crazy talk. So it could simply be that this was a form not just of life existing somewhere, but you could argue maybe even humans who lived on a planet Earth 1 million years ago, a meteorite hit, everybody died, and some, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of ways that you could get from point A to point B without it being like, oh, a funny looking blue person with horns, even though that could be what they look like. So to me, this allowed me to kind of put two and two together of at least like a connection that, yes, just because people, a life form exists billions of light years away, the missing link was, okay, well, how do they get to Earth? And then the why. So again, like talking about the topic, but also the storytelling, I gave the documentary high marks for that. And it was well, edited together to build that connection. Now, what I find a little bit peculiar is more the rationales of, they come to Earth, supposedly, and there was a lot of perspectives when they're like, maybe they're here and they're going to leave these UAPs for humans to like learn what the future technology looks like. Okay, it's a theory, but that's not how anybody's brain thinks. People are very selfish. And generally, because of what even Darcy was saying, like, look at corporations, right? Like right now there's an AI race. Yeah, my friend, like not you, Darcy, I'm not criticizing, but to somebody, I'm like, NVIDIA's not going to go tell Google how to make the TPU leapfrog NVIDIA's chips. You know what I mean? So that I don't necessarily believe. What I did think was interesting was more the ant analogy. Like, hey, these bastards on this planet Earth have been killing each other for thousands of years. They're not stopping. Oh, they're now, and it's true, in the last 80, 90 years, there's been more progress than ever before. So it could be like, these mofos are not just killing each other, but if they're killing each other, well, they're not going to have a hard time killing us if they could get enough of the technology. And look at this guy, Elon, who's now talking about space. So again, as a theory, that to me is more plausible, that they're coming to be like, hey, we're watching you. You did Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we thought you would stop there. But now you're starting to kind of like, step off, like just cool it, So that was like for me, whereas there's all these theories about aliens and there's all these theories about why these UAPs are, coming down and to like below the Earth atmosphere. But it all was presented pretty well, like the physics, the incentives, the connection between the two. But again, with the caveat that there's some people that are going to see this or hear about this and go, this is crazy talk. I'm sure, like, I'm going to probably put a post of this on LinkedIn. Yeah, people I work with in the field of finance and media, they're like, Ash, I didn't know you were a whack job. So again, it goes back to, no, I'm being harsh. I'm not saying I view it that way. You both were almost like, oh my God, it's like I use the N-word. You're like, you got to
No,
leave this.
I understand why you say that. And
Yeah,
I
but
just
I'm
think
like,
probably
no.
there's a lot of people like yourself who would assume that they would be judged for it, but I don't know. I think the tide is kind of turning, to be honest. Like, I'm not sure there's
No,
that many
yeah,
people out there who
but there's
would
also a
judge you. And
difference. But there's a difference. Like, let's be fair. Again, we're touching on previous themes. Like, Rob, you work at a media company. Darcy, this is like your area of expertise. I'm a CEO. I'm not looking for a job tomorrow. But if I was like a director of marketing and tomorrow I want to go apply to a VP of marketing job, forget applying to the Boeings, even if it's just to go sell cookies. Yeah, there could be a hiring manager that's going to be very much biased against you. So go back to your first question when you asked about the protagonist. Well, yeah, I could see how these people are stigmatized and these people are scapegoated and these people are cast as yahoos and whack jobs, right? So again, this is why I also call them, well, these are the heroes and the patriots that see a threat and they just want more transparency. I just want to touch on one thing because I think it's what Darcy said, and I wanted to just be like, yeah, giddy up. I think the mistake is thinking like this is a homogeneous group with the same incentives and the same beliefs. And again, I'm repeating myself, but the documentary did a really good job of explaining the why and why some people are speaking up and like how what is the explanation of both the life form and the actual UAPs. And so I think, frankly, this already, not to reverse what I just said, I do think that this has become less of a stigma. Like one of the reasons why I also don't push this that much on WatchMojo, I mean, since and again, we had other team members that were always into this and we'd occasionally talk about it. But I think because I'm like, yeah, a lot of people talk about this, like there's a side of me that goes, I don't think this is that taboo either. There's a side of me that goes with just the beauty of the internet and the access to information, that it's pretty much like probably more mainstream accepted the view that, yeah, there probably is life form out there. It is possible that there have been these UAPs, but I think what is like the question is the why and the who and what it means, and are these like advanced life forms? Like when one of the interviewees was like, "Is this time travel?" I'd like to believe in time travel. It's funny. I find time travel harder to wrap around. I'm a technical guy in my universe, but not a physicist. I find time travel harder to wrap my head than this. So I just think that's where some of it I still go, yeah, that part I'm not so sure, but most of it in terms of life form around the universe and the UAPs itself, I don't think that's actually that oddball as it was like when I was growing up, to be honest.
yeah, in terms of motivation, maybe Darcy, you can elaborate on this a little bit more because I feel like you have a lot of knowledge about it. But the film highlights the connection between UAP activity and nuclear sites, particularly in the United States. There's like a long history of documented UAP sightings over nuclear installations, and even stories about UAPs activating and deactivating nukes. Darcy, can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what is the consensus about the nuclear interest when it comes to UAP activity?
Yeah. So, I mean, even Ash kind of touched on that earlier with regards to nuclear bombs going off, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, And what's been fabled about this UFO UAP activity for decades now, about 80 to be precise, is that they really started showing up post nuclear blast destinations. And that's what might have alerted them to, hey, the kids are playing with some pretty powerful firecrackers in our neighborhood now, and we should probably go check them out. You know, I'm summating that very basically, but it's plausible, right? We don't know what happens on a metaphysical or quantum level when we detonate a nuclear bomb. And there's different types, right? There's plutonium bombs, there's hydrogen bombs, and varying sort of sizes, and we just don't know, right? But that is part of the sort of thesis that's been presented for a long time. That nuclear bombs is what alerted them to our existence, and that's when they first really started coming. But you know, you'll talk to people like Jeremy Corbell or any of these guys that appear on the Ancient Aliens History Channel show, and they'll say, oh, dude, nuclear bombs, they've been here since, 10,000 or 100,000 years ago. Where's the proof of that? It's all kind of everything. A lot of this stuff is inference, and we just need facts, right? But in terms of the documented evidence of them being attracted to nuclear sites, Robert Hastings, he did a book which is really interesting, and it shows dozens of incursions at nuclear missile silos around the United States and even in Russia. And that case where a Russian nuclear site was activated and those nuclear missiles were pointed at the United States, that was actually covered in Robert Hastings' book, UFOs Over Nukes. He interviewed a now famous Missile Man site member who was a manager at one of these sites and watched like 11 nuclear missiles go down in one night after a UAP airspace incursion right over the site. And that's Robert Salas. I met him at the congressional hearing 2 years ago now, where Elizondo and Tim Gallaudet and Mike Gould from NASA, as well as I think Schellenberger testified to Congress that, there's a real UAP crash retrieval program and there are non-human intelligence and all this stuff. So, what I think in regards to the nuclear mystery behind it is that, yes, they are interested. If you listen to some of Elizondo's testimony around the nuclear baiting program that they tried to set up, he talks about this in his book, Imminent. But he, appeared on lots of podcasts before and after the book was released. And one of the things that he talks about happened off the coast of Puerto Rico, in which, if you listen to the way he talks about it, he doesn't label that the nuclear baiting program, but you can basically deduce that was one of their exercises to see if a UFO would come. And essentially what happened was these Navy helicopter were sending in some SEALs, some Navy divers, to try and recover a nuclear warhead, a dummy nuclear warhead that had sunk off the coast of Puerto Rico. And there's been a lot of cases of UFO or USO activity off the coast of Puerto Rico. So why were they doing that there? What happens afterwards in his testimony is that a giant black dish-shaped craft came from underwater, sucked the nuclear warhead away from the divers, and they frantically escaped onto a helicopter and got out of there. And it was a very frightening incident. And I, will just say that I think that was an example, without him fully saying that was actually one of their nuclear UFO baiting programs in the ocean. And supposedly, why would they be interested in that? Well, these are really dangerous weapons, and they didn't stop Nagasaki and Hiroshima from going off. Are they going to? I mean, if you listen to his name is escaping me, Bob Jacobs, who talks about working at a Air Force base where they were doing a dummy warhead launch, and a UFO can be seen in the film after they, were debriefing and looking at what they had recorded in the sky, coming into frame and shooting this warhead with a beam and then flying out, and then the warhead spins out and lands on the ground. That could be messaging. It could be like, we're here, we're not going to let you launch a weapon of mass destruction that will destroy, part of your planet or a huge population. But I think time will tell, because we have a lot of nuclear weapons under different nations. And if somebody has the will and insanity to unleash that on an enemy, we'll see if there's actually some kind of interference with that. I almost don't believe that that's possible. I don't. That would be like, that would be them fully showing that they're here to the public. If we have some recorded event in history where the fire kicks off, a nuclear missile is launched, everybody sees it, it's televised, and then a UFO comes in and says, nope.
Yeah, the video evidence.
If you don't mind, Rob, just one thing. I agree.
Sure.
It's funny that you touched on this, because I started at first be like, oh, at this timestamp, then I stopped because I was just like writing down a lot of things that were interesting. But then the only time I made a note to go back and watch it again was around 1 hour onwards, 1:10, which is, when a lot of different military nuclear in particular sites at different times, a lot of different people were talking about experiences that had enough of a through line that if you think that information would be classified, like it's not there was a group chat where they're like, hey man, these crazy weirdos came down from space, and everybody repeats it. That's when I was like, okay, this is really interesting, because and then the argument of then, well, why would these aliens come down now? Then I was like, okay, now what you said at the end, I would find that hard to pull off despite the speed and all that, because generally, you hear if a nuclear weapon goes off, you don't got that much time. But all to say that to me is really the part, as much as the physics was really informative to me because it addressed like a blind spot I had. To me, that's when I kind of leaned in a bit more and go, okay, there's something more to it than just some soldier. Like I told you, when I was young, I saw something that looked not really as bright like the way they described it, but like in terms of size and certain other aspects. But I was too young, so I said this could be whatever. But the part after 1 hour for like about 5 to 10 minutes where you see all the nuclear military experiences, I thought that was like an extremely convincing part because of what also Darcy said before, which is people don't really trust the government. The government will lie, the government will hide. So if all these people are saying something similar, I'm like, when there's smoke, there might be fire.
Yeah. The thing about this film is that it's much more about interviewing witnesses than it is about presenting evidence in the form of video or photos. Like a lot of the things that were shown have been widely circulated before, but it was about getting 34 high-ranking government officials in front of the camera all at once to tell their stories about what they know. Do you see that as more credible or less credible than some sort of like new film that would come out tomorrow, Ash? Because in this day and age with AI and everything's being accused of being fake. But to have these people with their reputations on the line talking on film, it's quite something. What's your take on that?
I think it's a great question. I think that's very reinforces my first comment, which is the baggage or the bias you come in with. in this case, not so much bias, but the amount of knowledge you have. Like if I talk to YouTube, if I talk about YouTube or media to like a fellow industry person, there's a baseline of knowledge we have. I'm not going to explain like what CPM is, which is just the ad, rate per 1,000 views. But if I'm speaking to my, neighbor who may be like whatever, a vet, well, then I might go a bit, differently. So I actually understand why some people who've been covering this say, well, this wasn't really much. It wasn't a smoking gun relative to what I already knew. But I think that's because, again, like you don't know your privilege, young man. You know what I mean? Like you have enough knowledge and expertise. You've seen these things. For me, who read about these things, would see grainy pictures, would see the odd video. A lot of this was new. A lot of the video was new. And that's why I was like, wow. Now, yes, here's again, like it all touches. There is a difference still between internet and let alone social media and documentary produced by X living on Y, where somebody's like read a contract where you have to make representations, so this was actually, I thought, for the mainstream audience, which is not just mainstream America, but mainstream politicians that have to decide if they support disclosure or not. I thought this was actually like a good curation of the video evidence. But that being said, you're absolutely right. It was basically, here's like dozens of experts from different fields who either through access or through research are basically coming, and they weren't in a room together. It's like when, bad example, but sometimes when a kid falls, if they're young, they'll separate the parents, the cops, and they're like, so what happened? Because you want to see if the story jives. If one's like, oh yeah, little Bobby fell down the stairs, and the other one's like, yeah, Bobby, yeah, riding a bike. That's a red flag, right? Yeah. So here, that's what I meant. Like when I saw some of the people that I associated or I would have presumed would be like, this is nonsense. It did do a convincing job. But again, if you have a strong bias against it, as Darcy said correctly, like if you are a Christian, super hardcore right-wing, like religious person, very different than if you're probably an atheist, and et cetera, et cetera. So I actually thought it was a good balance. It didn't go so into the weeds. Like that part you said where Elizondo was actually like the professor, like I thought that and I know as a storyteller why they had to do that, because we're like, where's the B-roll? You can't just be sitting there and talking. But I thought good mix, like if it would have been just hardcore physics with like the biggest, nerd of physics, then you're like, I did not get that. It's like what I criticize about the field that I studied in, finance. I was like, they're just trying to make this complicated. It's really psychology and a bit of economics and consumer behavior, yada, yada. Okay, what's sprinkled with some math, but the guy earning $3 million a year working at a bank, well, he's going to make it seem like there's some black voodoo that only he understands, right? So I thought it was actually a pretty good balanced packaging, so to speak.
The last point that I want to touch on before we wrap it up is kind of the business side of this whole disclosure situation. Darcy, flipping it back to you, as somebody who releases your films largely for free on Tubi and Prime and other platforms for wide accessibility, did it bother you at all that this film costs $25 to rent for people who are interested in watching it?
Well, you look at the production value of this film, it's like bar none compared to other UFO films, documentaries that have been produced. And I will say, I have, far less a budget than probably Dan Farah had for this film. So I think the justified price there is to recoup your costs on production, right? And also it's the early adopter pricing. So if people are absolutely adamant they have to see it day one, they'll go pay $25. Same thing goes for a new Marvel movie. Certain people are going to skip the theater release and they're going to wait till it hits Disney Plus now. I think the same thing is going to play out with this film because it's such high caliber production value. It's eventually going to end up on some form of AVOD streaming service, whether that's a subscription service like Netflix, Amazon Originals, HBO, Hulu, I don't know, but it could. theoretically, and there's rumor that it might end up on Netflix.
Well, you want to license it? You want to?
Could we license it and make it a Watch
You got
Mojo
$1 million
exclusive?
Well, I won't lie. Even though I watched it and I from beginning to end, I don't know like the studio and all that. I'm going to research that. I'm curious. Yeah, I mean, I'm nothing like to just. I know sometimes we need to debate and banter. I think what Darcy says is reasonable. Like I recognize my privilege when the Mooch, Anthony Scaramucci, who I had interviewed after he got kicked out after 11 days, when he was like, "You want to come to my conference?" I went down, and as I was going, I was like, what was happening in the late 2010s was there was a lot of young people in America that were embracing socialism. And I was just, as somebody who loves history more than anything else, I saw that as a beautiful canvas, as a good opportunity to interview people, to talk about the rise of socialism, capitalism, why it's working, and ask like financiers, put them on the spot. And, you know, I had, again, it's a privilege. I could just go there, hire a crew. You know, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. So we really pulled it off quickly, a weekend. The cost was the material, and I never thought of the money. I just said we're going to put it on Watch Mojo in context. But it would be so hypocritical of me to be like, this guy's a sellout. And it's like, well, he's a creator. He's an artist. He's anything. It's like saying, you know, going to a restaurant and being like, dude, why are we paying? You know, we've talked about this. Like you limit it, and I think Darcy's spot on. So I don't question that as much, because that's just, it is business. And it's ironic because the irony is, surprisingly, the documentary talked a lot about economic determinism, that there is this kind of bias. And there was this arguments put forth by one of the interviewees that, well, if you know that like life form outside of this solar system has this super advanced, machinery, then Boeing is going to crash, and McKesson and then like Northrop Grumman and all that. Like, why would you have these budgets? But there's also the counterpoint that it's like the second you find out that there could be this imminent threat, kind of why the military industrial complex exists, there could be another arms race where they're just going to exploit it, right? So I understand that. And I do think, exactly as Darcy said, this will live somewhere else. If you're interested, you can inquire with them, but I'm assuming somebody else will pick it up. But yeah, I mean, I wish, but to that point, seeing how the initial window was, I guess, TVOD, transactional video on demand, we're bringing this together to the YouTube lingo. I would hope that this goes more on an AVOD, meaning Netflix. Netflix, sorry, they have that tier.
That's SVOD, right?
SVOD. See, you're a pro at this. I do hope this actually lives on more of a free to watch, where, you know, I believe information should be free. I was born in a country like Iran where you guys take this for granted. It's not, you know, it's a bit more complicated, right? So I hope it does live on a free to watch platform. But again, if the director goes, no, I'm going to put it on SVOD because it's my livelihood, I'm not going to accuse anybody of that. You know, that's a bit weird. But I do think, though, that just with people doing podcasts about it and like doing montages and, you know, through fair use, doing the top 10 list on things that stand out, that, like anything else, you know, is more effective. The reason why, again, to a previous point, the reason why big media, the rights holders, never sued us, even though we use their clips via fair use, fair dealing, wasn't just that they also were our partners and clients in other ways, and were fans, and we're not dumb. They understood where the puck was headed. It was that they were like, well, yeah, if somebody's going to talk about these IP in this ever more cluttered media landscape, it's advertising, it's promotion, right? So, yeah, no, I think I do think it's going to help. But I also, you know, inertia, you know, if you think of so many other things where you're hopeful, and I thought it was fascinating because I remember the George W. Bush. I saw that, I think, live when he was asked about, at the time, UFOs. And again, that guy wasn't the most eloquent of lads. So he was just like, well, what am I going to tell you, you know? But when you heard Barack
on
Obama,
Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah, on Jimmy Kimmel, exactly. But when you heard Barack Obama, who was, I think, a bit more still diplomatic, but like when you heard about the frustrations that I think it was Ford had, maybe Nixon as well, and like when you kind of saw it, you actually, I mean, because I always look at like people's psychology and like what drives them, you could tell that a lot of presidents were frustrated that they couldn't get full access because these are the most powerful men in the universe in their eyes. But what UFOs demonstrate is not just that they're not the most powerful person in the universe, it's they're not even the most powerful person, depending on the topic, in America. You know what I mean? So
That's
fascinating. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question for you, Ash. After having seen the film, like let's say it did come to Netflix tomorrow, do you think that it has the power to move the needle and change the cultural conversation around UAPs and get more public interest?
I think you two fine gentlemen actually may be a bit too in the trenches, and that's not a knock. That's you're experts at this compared to me. And I think it's like the analogy I've always liked is the frog that you dump in boiling water jumps out, but a frog sitting in water, as the water gets ever hotter, eventually becomes some kind of French dish. Let's leave it at that. So I think the narrative has already shifted, because like when you came to me and others came to me before and they were like, hey, we should cover this more, I wasn't like, no, it's verboten, we don't do this, they're going to think we're like some kind of, I was like, sure. Like my understanding was like, yeah, it's pretty much, I didn't really know the reasons, like I could assume, and this film does a good job of explaining the reasons. I was like, yeah, for whatever reason, the government doesn't want to come out. And one was like, well, what if the bad guys get it? What if the terrorists get it? And you know what? If the terrorists can, if, you know, the bad guys, if yes, one person's terrorist, another freedom fighter, but when people basically take planes and crash them in buildings, they're bad guys. There's not much ambiguity there. So if you could do that, then I understand that like the government could be like, yeah, is the threat really China or Russia? Because the same way we have deterrence with nuclear weapons, we would also exert deterrence with whatever this higher, you know, energy weaponry is. But yeah, what if, you know, some random crazy group in some far off place gets this, and then we're really screwed, right? So, but to your ultimately, yes, of course it's going to help, but I would say it'll accelerate a little bit. But I don't know if in a year or two it will make the difference that, you know, if you guys are pro disclosure that you're hoping for. But I think this will be just the latest step in what started when I was a little 8-year-old that cracked open the World Book Encyclopedia. And maybe I was searching like Uranus, not to be a childish, but the first word I thought was you. Well, I'm sorry, just
Uranus.
because it's so related.
Uranus.
Is it?
I don't know.
Okay, no. But then I come to UFOs, and then my imagination takes over and all that. So I just think this is the continuation of what we've seen probably from the mid 20th century, where it's going to continue and continue. But if I was a betting man, is Donald Trump going to stand in front of the podium and be like giving some kind of statement? Yeah, that I don't think so. But I think it'll just continue the trend.
I have a hard time seeing that happening also, but that's a balanced take. I appreciate that, Ash. Thank you both. Darcy, where can the viewers see your work if they're interested in doing so?
Yeah, they can tune in to some of my stuff on YouTube, at Occult Journeys, Twitter, at Occult Journeys, now known as X, Instagram, Darcy Weir Films, and my website. I have all my posters. If you click on the poster, it'll take you right through to a site, usually to watch the film for free. Awesome. Trailers, descriptions of the films and stuff. So, yeah.
Fantastic. And some of your stuff is up on the Unveiled YouTube channel as well. Yeah. We've been collaborating on that. And anybody else who's interested in more deep dives into the UAP realm can check out the Unveiled podcast, which I host. That is up on the Watch Mojo page. There's a podcast section for that. So go check that out as well. Thank you, gentlemen. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed this.
Thank you as always, Rob. And thank you, Darcy, for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.